I'm John Batchelor. Gordon Chang of Forbes.com is here with me. We're studying Jane's 360. Vietnam Navy receives third patrol vessel, looking like it's brimming with weapons, Gordon. Two 14.5 millimeter air defense guns, one AK-176 76mm automatic cannon, one radar-guided 6-barreled 30 millimeter AK-630 close-in weapon system, fires 3,000 rounds a minute up to maximum effective range of 2 kilometers. 420-ton boat can carry a crew of 35, a speed of 32 knots, a range of 2,500 nautical miles. I'd say you can get in a lot of trouble with that, Gordon. See?
And I wonder why they want it, John.
Yes, it's very attractive. It's delivered from Pennant HQ 274, was ordered from Hung Hai Shipbuilding Company in Haiphong. Well. We'll turn to James in just a moment. The things that pop up in James. We go immediately to Idaho because our man in Idaho joins us now, Stephen Yates. Stephen Yates, recently a candidate for the Idaho Assembly, and will be again if we have our way, because we need a man in Idaho. Stephen, we had no idea, none whatsoever. You mild-mannered, ice cream selling politician in Idaho Falls, that all of a sudden, within the last 76 hours, 76 hours, there's an interesting number I picked out of my head, Idaho would explode as the state that everybody in the world wants to know about. Stephen, what's going on? The Bergdahls, is this Idaho? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John. Well, Idaho is occasionally famous for some things that I don't think are terribly representative of the rest of the state, and I think that the long-bearded gentleman that appeared in the Rose Garden with the president is among those that the whole world is wondering, and Idahoans are probably wondering, how did this guy come from our state?
The parade, by the way, if you haven't heard, the parade to welcome home the young Bergdahl has been canceled in Haley, Idaho, because of the mayor, I believe the expression was, can't handle the interest. Is that the way you talk about the guns are coming out in Idaho, Stephen?
Well, I think the Haley is a humble town of 8,000 or so residents, and I imagine, given the level of interest, they may have had a slightly larger number than that arrive at the town. A very small number celebrating for the family, and a much larger number angry about this exchange.
Angry, that's a word that could describe Idaho at this moment. Go ahead, Gordon.
You know, my image of Idaho is that ad which has been running incessantly on TV of the truck with that enormous potato in the back. I mean, this is my image of Idaho. I mean, my image is not of Taliban sympathizing, defecting soldiers who come from where? The middle of the state?
Yeah, what is that? Idaho Stan? Is that what Haley is?
Well, there are a couple of sovereign liberal enclaves in a generally conservative state, and right there in the central part of southern Idaho, we do have Sun Valley and Ketchum that have relatively well-to-do people, lots of migrants from other parts of the country, a few famous movie stars that fly in, fly out, and Haley is a town that generally tends to service the skiing and other entertainment that keeps the Illuminati in comfort in the central part.
You just explained everything. Everybody in the country is now blinking. Oh, I get it. Hollywood. Okay, fine. We can turn the page. Let's go to what matters. Vietnam now has its third patrol craft. You're watching the Vietnam news. You were in the vice president's office. You served in the Bush administration. You know that the Chinese are aggressive, very aggressive. And since May 1st, that oil rig is a provocation. So far, the Vietnamese have chosen law, correct, Gordon? They've gone to the courts.
Well, they will probably.
They're seeking arbitration. But that patrol craft, does that make sense to you, Stephen, that they would use gunboats to counter the Chinese aggression?
Well, the shoe has been on the other foot, so to speak. I mean, there have been times when others have put civilian craft into Chinese waters that they had claimed for themselves, and they will use all kinds of tactics, some civilian, some military, to push people away. I think the Vietnamese have seen what's happened with the Philippines and are trying to make sure it doesn't happen to them, where the Chinese encroachment becomes armed and immovable. And so it seems natural they would have this capability, and certainly when you have, I guess, what we call kinetic objects out at sea, that something can collide at some point.
What's very interesting, Steve, is that now you have Vietnam talking to the Philippines, you have them talking to the Japanese, and of course they're talking to us. And so it seems like Hanoi is really integrating itself into the region in a very quick manner because of the pressure from China. And this is probably going to be the dynamic around the region as we see these countries try to find some comfort in each other. I mean, do you think that Vietnam will actually form these durable relationships with others, or is this just temporary?
Well, I think it's a marriage of convenience to a degree, but it's one of those interesting examples that there have been some benighted professors who talk about concepts of soft power and how China has used it masterfully against us, but this is an example of Chinese soft power going in the opposite direction, maybe because it's not so soft. They really have, you have a communist government in Vietnam that you would think would be naturally sympathetic to its neighbor to the north. Of course, there's a deeper history to it that you and I both know, and it's definitely one of these relationships where they have been alienated by Beijing. And so I don't know that they trust us as much, but they trust that our capability is about all that they have to rely upon to balance.
25 years since the massacre that we know as Tiananmen Square. 25 years, June 3rd, June 4th. And Gordon asks a ponderous question. There must be 15 parts to the answer, but I ask you quickly, Stephen. Why is there suddenly so much more interest in Tiananmen now? While the Chinese Xi Jinping's regime is being aggressive and brutal around the world. This isn't peace and dovishness coming out of Beijing. And yet suddenly there are these very large crowds in Hong Kong, right, Gordon? Very large crowds.
150,000.
And there's fascination on social media, even the Weibo, right? The Twitter in China with what happened in Tiananmen. Why now, Stephen?
Well, I just sense that it's a rising generation that has become increasingly aware that the simple truths that the students talked about 25 years ago, maybe they didn't have the capability to go beyond what they did, but they were met with a loud argument from an establishment in Beijing and elsewhere that said, no, what the Chinese people really want is stability. And after we use force to put you down, everyone will understand that they would be wise to just choose stability. And I think in this day and age, the younger generation and the more internationally integrated businesses and other interests in China know that they're capable of more than that for themselves, that it's not American values, it's something that they want for themselves. And that kind of yearning, I think, is driving the discontent with what their leadership currently delivers. It's not delivering enough by way of freedom, flexibility, and opportunity for their people.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you have two Chinas right now. You have a China which is very mobile, dynamic, very hard to contain, and you have a Communist Party that seems to be moving in the wrong direction with Xi Jinping and his Marxist and mass line campaigns. This really just is a throwback to the 1950s, and it's so much at odds with the rest of Chinese society, which is dynamic. And as you point out, there is a very, very big gulf between the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party and the people on the other side.
Absolutely, and I just think that they're getting to a critical mass. Maybe they don't believe the government will do the same thing again. They need to be careful about that judgment. But it's very, very clear that they see that they're capable of doing more. They've risen economically, and they know that it just makes sense that they have more responsibility they could take for their own fate politically. And the Communist Party is known widely for corruption. There's famous cases we've talked about in the recent past, and the people want more responsive, more representative government.
Stephen Yates, in Idaho, commenting on the aggression of the Chinese government 25 years after Tiananmen. Stephen is Chief Executive Officer of DC International Advisory. Gordon Chang, I'm John Batchelor.